Hey everybody, second objection is about relevance. Relevance is important because it governs what evidence can come into a trial. Um, Generally speaking, a fact is relevant if it has any tendency to make something more or less likely to have happened or occurred. Put another way, relevant evidence is evidence that has a tendency to make a fact or a piece of evidence more or less likely. Okay, an example of that might be that the location of the defendant in a murder case and evidence to that effect makes it more likely that the defendant, more or less likely that the defendant may have caused the murder or may have murdered somebody. That makes sense. If you can prove they were there, then they probably would have done it. That's the sort of idea. So relevance is a very low bar. Almost everything is relevant, unless, and this is the exception, this is important, unless there's what's called a Rule 403 objection. So remember, a piece of evidence is relevant if it has any tendency to make a fact more or less likely. Okay, low bar, pretty much everything can get in. Pretty much anything is relevant. The only way that you can really get that excluded is with something called the Rule 403 motion. Rule 403 motion is an objection. It's an objection that says, Your Honor, we object on the grounds of relevancy. This information will be more prejudicial than it will be probative in this case. What does that mean? We're afraid that it's going to prejudice the jury into thinking ill of the client in a way that the information does not, in the way that information should not do. We're afraid that it's going to make them biased. We are afraid that it's going to, maybe that it's going to take up too much time to introduce a certain fact pattern or a line of questioning. It's bad for the jury to hear it, therefore we don't want them to hear it. And what's more important is that, and this is really what's important about the prejudicial versus probative thing, is that the cost of the jury hearing this for our case is greater than the probative benefit to letting it on the record. Okay, so we have to be more worried about what the jury is going to hear with this case, or excuse me, with this piece of evidence, than we are about the weight or the value of the evidence itself. That concern about prejudice has to be higher than the probative value than the evidence itself. The concern about prejudice has to be higher than the probative weight or value of the evidence if you want to get it excluded. That's sort of really one of the big ways and one of the only ways to exclude evidence. So again, relevance is any piece of evidence, and a piece of evidence is relevant if there's any tendency to make a fact more or less likely to have occurred. And the way that you can exclude relevant evidence is to argue that it is more prejudicial than it is probative. It's going to prejudice the jury. We're more concerned about that than the actual value of evidence that the jury will hear by hearing it. Those are the balancing concerns with relevance.